All right, let's dive into a story about a massive transformation. For years, if you heard the word crypto, you probably thought of one thing: wild speculation. But that whole narrative is changing. And I mean fundamentally. We're going to explore what's being called crypto's next chapter. For the longest time, the big question hanging over this entire industry was pretty simple. Is this whole thing just a bubble? A bunch of risky assets driven by hype and crazy price swings? I mean, that's been the perception for more than a decade. But here's the thing. As we look towards 2026, that perception just doesn't really fit anymore. The answer to that question now seems to be a pretty clear no. The tech has been quietly growing up, maturing into what could be a brand new foundation for finance. So how on earth did that happen? Let's break it down. Okay, so to really get this, we have to start with the core technical problem that held everything back for years, a problem often called crypto's impossible triangle. This is the famous blockchain trilemma. You can thank Vitalik Buterin for the term. It's basically a law of physics for decentralized networks. It says you can have three amazing properties, but you can only ever pick two at the same time. You just can't have it all. And what are those three properties you have to choose between? First, security. You definitely want that. Second, scalability, which is just a fancy way of saying speed. And third, decentralization, the whole point of crypto. For years, this was the trade-off. You want something super secure and decentralized like Bitcoin? Fine, but it's going to be slow. You want it fast and secure? Okay, but you'll probably have to give up some decentralization. It was a constant balancing act. So, if this triangle was supposed to be impossible, how did the industry finally crack the code? Well, that brings us to Section 2, building a better blockchain. The huge breakthrough came from a total shift in architecture. See, the old way was monolithic. Imagine one person trying to do every single job at a company: security, HR, accounting, everything. It's going to be slow and expensive, right? Well, the new way is modular. Now think of it like a team of specialists. You have different layers doing different jobs, which makes the whole system unbelievably fast and way, way cheaper. And the result of that modular shift? It's just staggering. We're now seeing speeds of over 300 transactions per second on the big networks. And this isn't some far-off promise. This is happening right now. It finally closes that massive performance gap with old-school systems like Visa. The other elephant in the room was always energy consumption. The original system, proof of work, was notorious for using a ton of power. So the industry evolved. The move to a new model called proof of stake was a game changer. It slashed energy use by over 99%. Seriously, it basically solved one of the biggest and most valid criticisms of crypto overnight. But you know how it is. You solve one problem, and a new, more subtle one pops up. With proof of stake, that new challenge was something called MEV, or maximal extractable value. So what is it? Put simply, it's the profit that the computers confirming transactions can make by secretly shuffling your transaction around for their own benefit. It's kind of like a ticket taker at a concert letting their friends cut the line for a kickback. If you let that run wild, it's not a fair system. So what's the fix? It's a really clever idea called proposer-builder separation, or PBS. It just splits up the jobs. You have one group that builds the blocks of transactions and a totally separate group that proposes which block goes onto the chain next. By separating those roles, you make it much, much harder for any one person to manipulate the system. It keeps things fair. Okay, so how do we get those super fast speeds we were talking about? The magic word is rollups. Now, there are two main flavors. The first, optimistic rollups, are, well, they're optimistic. They just assume all transactions are valid to move things along quickly. The catch is a 7-day waiting period on withdrawals, just in case someone cheated. But the real revolution is ZK-Rollups. ZK stands for zero knowledge. It's like being able to prove you solved a puzzle without actually showing anyone your answer. This cryptographic magic proves transactions are valid instantly, which means you get your money out right away. This is really seen as the future of making blockchains scale. So we've got all this amazing new technology. It's faster, cheaper, greener, and fairer. But what does it actually do in the real world? That takes us to Section 3, the journey from digital gold to, well, to pretty much everything. The result of all these upgrades is, frankly, mind-blowing. We are now looking at a new financial system that's powerful enough to beat traditional finance on almost every single important metric. Now, I know that's a huge claim, so let's actually look at the side-by-side comparison. Let's put these two systems head-to-head. In the old world, you sell a stock, you wait 2 business days for the money to actually settle. In DeFi, we're talking less than 15 seconds. Think about accessibility. Traditional finance has all sorts of gatekeepers. DeFi is permissionless. If you have an internet connection, you're in. And transparency? Forget waiting for a quarterly report. With DeFi, every transaction is auditable in real time on a public ledger. These aren't just small improvements. This is a completely different way of thinking about how finance works. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it's not just about digital money anymore. We're now seeing the tokenization of real-world assets, or RWAs. This means taking things like corporate bonds, government debt, even a piece of a skyscraper, and putting it on a blockchain. This lets them trade 24/7, and it opens the door to fractional ownership. You could literally buy $10 worth of an office building, then sell it 5 minutes later. It makes everything liquid. But let's be real, all this amazing tech and potential doesn't mean a thing if it's still the Wild West. For this to go mainstream, you need clear rules. And that brings us to our next section, the end of anarchy. By 2026, the Wild West days are officially in the rearview mirror. Over in Europe, you have MiCA, which is this massive legal framework that brings clear rules to all 27 EU nations. And in the US, the Genius Act finally draws a clear line in the sand. This regulatory clarity is the green light that big institutions were waiting for to get involved in a serious way. So out of this regulated world, a two-tiered system for digital dollars has emerged. On one hand, you have central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Think of these as being used behind the scenes by the big banks to settle huge amounts of money between themselves. And then you have private stablecoins, which are fully regulated. These are what you and I actually use for everyday shopping and to interact with DeFi. 2 different tools for 2 very different jobs. So let's just recap. Crypto has tackled its biggest technical, economic, and regulatory hurdles. The industry has matured. So are we done? Is that the end of the story? Not quite. Now we're facing the quantum future. A recent academic paper really summed it all up perfectly. It says cryptocurrency has successfully decoupled from its identity as a purely speculative vehicle. In other words, it's not just a casino anymore. It's grown up and it's found a real-world purpose. But as you know, in technology, the evolution never ever stops. There's always a new dragon to slay on the horizon. And the next one is a big one, cryptographically relevant quantum computers. We are talking about machines so powerful, they could one day break the very encryption that makes this whole system secure. So the system we just walked through is secure. It works, it's safe, for now. But the multi-trillion-dollar question that the smartest people in this space are working on is this: will today's system survive the arrival of quantum computers? And that is the challenge that will define crypto's next chapter.